Pacing can make or break your story, especially in scenes where you're talking about trauma. Today's video is going to be showing you how to vary your sentence structures, how to vary your pacing. Hi, I'm Kammi with Flash University, and I give weekly advice for authors and for even newbie writers, for anybody that wants to write, sell, and publish and market and all that fun stuff. They want to have a bestseller. So I'm here for you. So today's video topic is trauma. So trauma is something that is widely experienced and not universally understood, especially in the writing community. So right before I sat down to record this video, there was almost literally, there was a disagreement even among professional writers about how to vary your pace in writing. So I'm going to talk about it specifically to how it relates to trauma. There are different types of trauma and there are different types of reactions to trauma. And you're going to vary your sentences depending on what you're trying to convey in the moment. So if you have something that should feel clipped, should feel fast-paced, should have, keep somebody on the edge of their seat, if you're writing a thriller, a suspense, if someone's trying to run away or escape, this is when you would use really short clipped sentences. Now, to be clear, sometimes when you say short clipped sentences, people think two words. And I kid you not, I have read flash fiction stories in magazines where you're supposed to have smaller sentences in the flash fiction so you can fit a big story in a small area. And they chopped the sentences up and they took all the words out, and what was left was Jane ran. See Jane run. You remember those books you read in kindergarten when you're learning how to read? That was what was left of their story. Don't butcher your scene by eliminating all the words. But you do want to have shorter, simple sentences. You do not want to have compound or complex sentences. You don't want to use a lot of commas. You don't want to use semicolons or colons or anything like that. You want very straightforward. And then you want concrete language, vivid, concrete language. So, for example, if someone is running away, you want to show the fear that they're experiencing by those short sentences, but also by describing everything that's concrete. So you want the reader to feel her toes, if the character's a girl, his or her toes hitting a rock and tripping, right? You want them to almost feel that moment with them. So, for example, her heart pounded as she pushed her legs faster and faster, urging them. She needed to go. She needed to get out. She needed to get away. Something like that. Do you see how those are very short sentences? Okay, but do you notice that they were also punctuated? Well, you can also throw in a large word now and again. And what that does, once you get words that are, you remember counting the syllables when you're younger, once you get words that are in 3 and 4 syllables, what happens is when they're in smaller sentences is they sort of stick out like a sore thumb. And especially if they're at the end of a sentence, what that does is that ends that sentence with sort of a punch. So I would use that very infrequently, but you can use that to add extra punctuation. So another type of trauma would be, for example, somebody gets a medical diagnosis they do not want to hear. And what would happen in those types of trauma is that your brain will go into what's called shock. And there is shock for medical reasons, and then there's shock for psychological reasons. And they're both considered shock. And what happens is your brain sort of says, I'm all done with this. I don't want to hear anything else about it, so I'm not going to. And it starts to hyper-focus on details that seem like details that we don't notice every day, like how bright the lights are, or the pattern of tile on the floor. Maybe we notice the pattern of tile on the hospital floor, but we don't really stop to consider it. But in those moments, those things are highlighted in our brains. And so if you've ever seen a movie where someone has had a bad diagnosis, you'll notice that the lights get brighter, the vision around them gets blurry. And so you want to use language that's very, very blurry, very non-specific. Another word would be ambiguous. So you still want to use smaller words though in this moment, and you still want to use smaller sentences. The reason for that being the person who is in that moment is not able to fully process information the way that they should or the way that they normally would. And so what happens is they revert back to their base language, not their academic language, but the language they're very familiar with, they use on a daily basis. You know, we don't speak to our college professor the way that we speak to our children or our spouse or our friends, right? We speak differently. You would revert back to that language. And so it's going to naturally be smaller words and smaller sentences. But all the concrete, the vivid, feeling the blood as it pumps through their legs as they're running, right? Seeing their toe trip on the rock, all of that is gone. You want to remove that, and you want to have very, very vivid language with regards only to some of the surroundings and how it makes them feel more disoriented. They're not going to be able to analyze the diagnosis until much later. So don't write that in the scene right then, because anybody who's ever been through a situation like that is going to out you fast. So then there is after the fact. So when someone is in a safe place and they're processing the trauma they've been through, what you would do then is you would write really long sentences. And this is what the debate was about, actually, whether short clipped sentences increase the pace or whether long sentences decrease the pace. And the answer is yes and no, right? So that's why the debate happened, is because both people use sentences in a slightly different way in their writing. So with regards to when, after the fact, when you're dealing with trauma, when you're writing a story that is very character-based, you're going to use a lot more of the long, flowy sentences anyway, a lot of commas, a lot of semicolons, compound, complex, right? When you're writing something that's a mystery or a thriller, you're going to use that first technique where it's a lot of those shorter sentences, and you're going to be talking about very concrete details. Well, when you're dealing with a situation where someone is processing trauma, you revert to this character centric is what it's called, when you're focused on what's happening inside of the character. You revert back to that in your writing. And so sentences are going to be longer, complex, like I said. They are going to use the academic language. They are going to use any flowery description you can use, because that person is trying to understand what happened. And that's what our brains need in order to process, think, and heal, is to understand a situation. And so that's what they're doing in that moment, is they're understanding it. And so they're describing it in great detail. And they're using a lot of, let's say, metaphors and similes. And when I went through a personal trauma, I kept saying, I feel like I'm drowning, I'm suffocating, I'm drowning, right? And that described the anxiety I was feeling, because anxiety literally pushes on your chest. And so it feels a lot like you can't quite get a breath. And so in that moment, when I would process later, I would say it felt like drowning. It felt like suffocating. This is someone sitting on my chest. Have you ever heard or read that expression? That's where it comes from, is anxiety and processing that anxiety. So there you have it. So let me just give a quick summary. When you're doing a faster paced thing, when you're doing a mystery, a thriller, or there is an immediate danger, you want to use shorter sentences with very vivid language. When you are dealing with the type of trauma where someone is going into shock, you want to use shorter sentences with very, very blurry language. And when you are dealing with the emotional impact of that trauma, you want to use longer sentences, because it allows their brain to understand and to dissect that situation, and to then dream about it, think about it, and remove it from their brain. And that's what our brains do. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, please click like and subscribe. And remember, if you ring the bell, YouTube will let you know anytime I upload a video. Welcome to my channel, and let me help you write your next bestseller.